these bail conditions are worse than the conditions, the free speech conditions that Putin has put on Volany, his chief critic. You could interview him in his jail cell in Russia, but you cannot interview under Trudeau's Canada Tamara Lich about the circumstances of the protests. So,
but as a lawyer, you did. Hey everyone, William Diaz here with Rebel News, currently at 395 Wellington Street here in Ottawa, Canada, and that's because, well, we know that from October 13th to November 25th, an Emergencies Act public order inquiry commission is happening here in Ottawa, where Justin Trudeau is set to testify, Omar Al-Gabra is set to testify as well, and we will also see Tamara Lich testifying, where the commission should be investigating Justin Trudeau's use of the Emergencies Act on the peaceful Freedom Convoy protesters here. Protesters that were here to protest Justin Trudeau's COVID-19 mandates and the government's treatment of the unvaccinated people during the pandemic, where Justin Trudeau afterwards used the Emergencies Act on those protesters to seize their bank accounts, to seize their assets, to seize their money, while they were exercising their right to peacefully protest in Ottawa. So today I got the chance to interview Tamara Lich's lawyer. For those of you who don't know, Tamara Lich was one of the main organizers of the Freedom Convoy. She is a peaceful Mrs. Grandmother who organized the Truckers' Convoy to make a peaceful stand in the nation's capital. She spent 6 weeks in jail on breach of conditions for mischief charges, something that, even if convicted for, she would never see the inside of a jail cell. Unbelievable. Keith Wilson, who is also here, who's been representing Tamara Lich from the beginning. So check out how our exchange went. Yeah, so just for the viewers at home, that don't really know what's happening for the next 6 weeks, can you just outline quickly what's happening here in Ottawa?
Well, my name is Keith Wilson. I'm one of the lawyers representing the Freedom Convoy. And because the federal government took the unprecedented step of invoking the Emergencies Act, under that law, there's a requirement for a public inquiry to be held, and that public inquiry has started here in Ottawa, and it's going to last at least 6 weeks. There's going to be a wide range of evidence presented, witnesses from the municipality, residents, the protesters, the police, and the federal government, including the Prime Minister, are going to be testifying. I think it's going to be a very engaging process. You can tell from the opening day that the different stakeholders have staked out some very different territory in terms of what their positions are and what they think needs to be addressed here.
And what would be the best possible outcome that you see from this inquiry?
Well, the truth comes out and with some accuracy as to what happened here in Ottawa and what was happening in other locations in the country at the time that the Prime Minister and his cabinet made the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act, because they made the decision in a cabinet meeting on the Sunday evening of February 13th. And on the Saturday and the Sunday of that weekend, the borders had opened at Coutts and Windsor. There was no border closures. And over that same weekend, myself and other people involved with the Freedom Convoy had negotiated a deal at the initiation of Mayor Watson of the City of Ottawa to move the trucks and the protest vehicles out of downtown, consolidate on Wellington, and bring the downtown back to normal. And so in my view, and I think the evidence is going to show that it wasn't justified, there was no need for it. And the Emergencies Act's a pretty dramatic tool, to say the least. What the Emergencies Act does is it allows the government to interfere in your life without going through the normal due process. So many of my clients, many of those people involved in the Freedom Convoy had their bank accounts frozen. They were unable to buy groceries. They were unable to put gas in their vehicles. Their credit cards stopped working. They were unable to take money out of their bank accounts. Their mortgage payments bounced, and so on. The order issued by the federal government, by the Deputy Prime Minister, Freeland, also ordered insurance companies to cancel all of the insurance policies, including life insurance, mortgage insurance, vehicle insurance, and ordered the securities companies to liquidate any investments that Canadians had who are on this list. So these are dramatic powers to isolate Canadians from normal living and put them in a virtual jail cell financially. And in addition, what a lot of people don't understand is that under the Emergencies Act, it also gives the federal government powers to intrude into areas of provincial jurisdiction. It gets to override provincial government's rights. So it's a very significant tool. We've only used it historically when there's been a world war, like World War I, World War II, and then the infamous FLQ crisis in Quebec, where there was murders and kidnappings. So this is a very dangerous precedent. If the conditions that were on the ground here were all it takes, then we've set a very dangerous precedent in terms of government's ability to overreach and strip Canadians of their rights.
And earlier we saw a representative for businesses and citizens in Ottawa say that the convoy harmed them enormously. What do you have to say to those claims?
Well, there were businesses that were harmed because the government ordered them closed. And there was no good reason for that. The businesses that stayed open, particularly restaurants and food service businesses, will tell you, and they've testified, and we have affidavits from them, that it was the most remarkable and profitable experience that they'd had in decades and helped them recover and avoid bankruptcy from the 2 years of government mandates. So the reality is there was no good reason for businesses to be told to close by the government. And the other thing is, too, if you research this, you'll see that the government put together a compensation program. I believe it was around $20 million. And despite sending people door to door to the businesses to file claims, they could only give away a little bit of the money. So in my view, this notion that's being put forward that these businesses were so badly harmed is being overstated. This notion that these businesses were so badly harmed is being overstated. And to the extent that they were harmed, it wasn't because of the protests, it was because the government taking the unusual step of telling so many of them to close when there was no good reason for them to close.
And one last thing for me, we don't see Doug Ford in the witnesses, we don't see Jason Kenney in the witness list, we don't see really any premiers in the witnesses. Do you think it would have been a good idea to see some premiers of provinces appearing here in front of, with the committee?
Well, I think their position of the provincial governments can be made known through their lawyers. They didn't make the decisions that to invoke the Emergencies Act. The federal government did. So I think it is proper that the focus of the commission is on calling the Prime Minister as a witness, and he will be cross-examined, and calling 1/5 of the cabinet is actually going to be called if you look at all of the ministers that are on the witness list. So this is very significant. The government's got some explaining to do. They use this incredibly powerful tool over Canadians who were engaged in lawful protest, protesting against what many Canadians obviously felt was government overreach with the COVID mandates. Remember, the federal mandates restricted 6 million Canadians' ability to fly or get on a train. That meant millions of Canadians were prevented from attending weddings, funerals, being at the side of a dying loved one, providing care for a family member coming out of hospital, the joyous experience of being at the side of one of your adult children when they give birth to their first child or going to a celebration of some kind. These are very important things in our lives, as we've all really learned because of COVID and the pandemic and the shutdowns. So that's why people were here, and we're Ottawa residents' inconvenience. They certainly were, but that needs to be compared and put side by side with the impact that these mandates had on millions of Canadians and why tens of thousands came to Ottawa over the period of the 3 weeks, and why many thousands lined the sides of highways and overpasses in blizzard, cold winter conditions to cheer them on.
Thank you.
So after we started asking some questions, some mainstream media reporters arrived where we were to do some scrums as well. Take a look at how some of their exchanges went as well.
And I noticed that when Mr. Marazzo entered the room, he initially sat right behind you and Miss Leach, and I saw you said something to him, and then he went to the other side of the room. Did that have anything to do with the issues around Miss Leach being arrested for the alleged bail breach?
Yeah, well, it's funny. A number of reporters have asked me if they could interview Tamara Leach today, and they can't. And the reason is her bail conditions are simply outrageous. For example, she's not allowed to speak with anybody against the COVID mandates or in support of the Freedom Convoy. She's not allowed to be in the presence of certain other individuals, some of whom she doesn't even know who they are or what they look like, unless she's in the presence of counsel. As you saw, she was in the presence of counsel. But out of an abundance of caution, I waved Mr. Marazzo off, which you observed, correct? So these bail conditions are worse than the conditions, the free speech conditions that Putin has put on Volany, his chief critic. You could interview him in his jail cell in Russia, but you cannot interview under Trudeau's Canada Tamara Lich about the circumstances of the protests. So,
but as a lawyer, you also acknowledge we do have an independent judiciary, and Trudeau's not giving the order here. It's a judge who issued that order, and it's pretty common in bail hearings where people are co-accused. Don't interact with the people you're co-accused with or other associates. We see this often in lots of cases.
Fair enough. I'm not as concerned about that one. It's the one where she's not allowed to speak publicly or any forum in a way that's critical of the government's COVID mandate policies or in support of the Freedom Convoy. That's the one that's most egregious. They all go too far. We don't place these kinds of conditions on a Canadian who is a grandmother of Métis ancestry, who has no criminal record, used to work as a 911 dispatcher, and is accused of no major or violent crime. We just don't do that. This is highly, highly unusual. It's my view, and more importantly, the view of many, many criminal lawyers and specialists, that she's a political prisoner and that these conditions that have been imposed upon her by a very aggressive Crown prosecutor are politically motivated.
Did those leave out some, starting of the evidence being introduced, maybe some timeline, some overview of, some of it was already out in the public discourse? Did you take issue with anything that the Commission presented today? Are you in agreement so far with what they've presented?
Well, there was so much presented. Clearly, as you saw, the different interests, whether it's the police services versus the governments versus the protesters or the residents, put forward very different views of events. And this is a critically important process that we're embarking on. And I think it's going to be very engaging, and there's probably going to be some surprises along the way for all of us as to some of the evidence that will come up.
Is there anyone in particular that you are looking forward to cross-examining with your standing order here?
Well, I think the parties that have the most explaining to do are the Prime Minister and the 5 cabinet ministers. The reason why Tamara Lich is here today is we need her to advise us as lawyers when she's hearing the evidence go in. This is very normal. If you ever find yourself in litigation, the lawyer brings you to court. And the reason is you need to whisper in the lawyer's ear and say, that's not what happened or this is what happened. It needs to happen in real time. And then in the evenings in a trial or a hearing, you spend time with your clients and the witnesses, reviewing what happened in the day and preparing for the next day. So it's a very involved process. Clients are always side by side with their lawyers. And Mr. Marazzo is here, Ms. Lich is here, and others will be coming in the coming days.
So there you have it, folks. The Commission is going to be continuing for 6 more weeks here in Ottawa, where I will be joined by a rotating crew of hardworking independent journalists. We will have Sheila Gunn-Reid join us for live streams as well. We will have Ezra Levin as well, bring you the other side of the story here from Ottawa. So definitely stay tuned for that. For Rebel News, this is William Diaz. So the Commission will be going on for 6 more weeks, as I just mentioned. If you want to make sure to see everything that is happening and stay up to date with all of the action here, straight from downtown Ottawa, straight from Parliament, go check out truckercommission.com. Also, if you want to help us pay our expenses here, which includes an Airbnb, travel, food, and everything, you can also chip in at that same link.